Hello, and welcome to my quick overview of PHP. In this, we're going to sort of zoom through some stuff just to give you a sense of some of the elements of the language, which we'll cover in more detail as we go forward. This material is copyright Creative Commons attribution, so that means you can remix it or share it, both the video and the slides. So the PHP language is one of many C-inspired languages. And it's really nice that the C language came along and sort of established a certain set of things of how if statements would work and curly braces and semicolons and no white space needed. Those all came from it. But PHP is also a later language, and so things like Perl are also inspirations. So things like the use of a $sign to start a variable name, that's more of a scripting kind of a language, and associative arrays. And then the way it works is that it's designed to be part of a HTML file where we swap between parts that are interpreted and run as PHP code and then parts that are just HTML code. So it's a programmable, extensible HTML templating language. So if you looked at the video with Rasmus Leerdorf, basically PHP is aimed at your maximum productivity. And if you compare it, say, to a language like Python, which is really trying to teach you precision, PHP assumes that when you type a line, you mostly know what you're doing. So it doesn't resort to errors as often. If it can kind of guess what you're doing, it tries. And so there's some choices that you can make and some different kinds of syntax. But you have to realize that PHP is a powerful tool, and you're expected to use it in a powerful way. And this is great when you're programming. I really enjoy programming in PHP because I'm like, zoom, and it just gets done. But if you make a mistake unintentionally, it'll still zoom and do the wrong thing. So you got to be kind of careful. So here's sort of a prototypical PHP document. And again, it's a template of an HTML page, right? So this is the beginning of an HTML page, except that this ends in .php on the server, and .php on the server. And because of that, if you've got the right web server that knows about PHP, it says, oh, okay, that's HTML, yada yada, and it goes like, oh, that's the beginning of PHP. So this less than question mark tag, that was in general a tag that HTML used to switch to a programming language inside the server. And less than question mark PHP is probably one of the most common ones, but it is definitely not the only one. And then from that point until question mark less than, you have PHP code. And so we see this code right here is in a very different syntax than this code right here, because the first part's HTML and the second part's PHP. So you got double quotes and semicolons and multiplication and all kinds of stuff and echo statements. So this is a programming language. It's PHP. And what it's basically doing here is it's saying, you know, echo hi there with a \n, that's the new line that causes the cursor to come down and go to the beginning of the next line. $answer equals 6 times 7, that's an assignment statement. And then this one's a little bit weird where you actually have a string with a $answer. This does get substituted. And so double quoted strings are kind of clever. We'll talk about that in a bit. And then we sort of switch back. And so when this runs, we end up seeing this output basically, right? The H1, we got the second paragraph, and whatever is coming out of these echo statements, that becomes the document. So there's a paragraph tag here, a paragraph tag there, but these echo statements generate this one line. Now, if you were to view source, you would see that you'd see how these lines work. But basically, once it comes out to your browser, the browser is going to do things like reflow your lines, and if you change the width of your browser, it would reflow the lines. So PHP is really not controlling how your browser interprets the HTML. Once this HTML comes to your browser, the browser is in charge. Oops. So this is just a little moment. You can actually run PHP from the command line on your computer, whether it's in Windows box or your Linux box or your Macintosh box. And some people tend to use this instead of Python because they learned PHP first. But we're not going to do that much in this class. I just am putting this in there in case you ever see it done. It's possible to do it, right? Write things to deal with data and process data and read and write files and walk through directories and do very non-web kinds of things with PHP. It's totally capable of doing that. So if we look at the keywords of PHP, these are the keywords, and the keywords, of course, are the words that, if you use them in PHP syntax, like, say, if, for example, if you use if, it always means if, and you can't make a variable named if, for example, as a result. And these are the words that have meaning to PHP. So we have our keywords, and we also have variable names. Now, interestingly, variable names in PHP start with a $sign. This is really influenced from scripting languages like Perl. You have to follow it by a letter or an underscore, followed by any number of letters, numbers, and underscores. Okay, and case matters in that upper and lower makes variable names distinct. So on the right-hand side, we've got some good ones. $ABC, $total, $largest, underscore, so, underscore far. That's perfectly good. ABC, that's wrong because there's no $sign. This is wrong because there is a 2 after the $sign, not a character. And then this is wrong because that punctuation is wrong. You could do calculations and expressions. So here we have, we're sliding into PHP. PHP $x equals, now this seems kind of strange for just about every other programming language. The notion of 15 plus 27, where 15 is a string, usually that would blow up. But PHP is very aggressive in its type conversion. This is one of those examples where it says you must have meant to do that. And I'll try to figure out what best I can do here. So I'll give a try at turning that quote 15 into a number and then adding it. And so indeed it adds it, and x ends up with the integer sum 42, and that's what comes out of this particular program. We've been using the echo statement. There are two ways to do this. Partly it's because of two influences. One is shell scripts and the other is Perl, and it tries to make it so that shell script programmers feel comfortable and Perl programmers feel comfortable. So you can either use echo. You can use echo in various forms. Typically, I tend to use it in this form. I tend not to put parentheses in, and I tend not to put multiple parameters in with commas. So this is the way I tend to do most of my output. In print, you can do all the same kind of things, but you can't put two parameters separated by commas the way you can on echo. So this is kind of subtle stuff. I tend to have my code look kind of like that. I just treat the echo statement by itself. I might concatenate something together on the echo statement, but these are choices that you have. So if statements use curly braces, and the logical operators are very C-like. Double equals, for example, is the equality operator. I always think of this as having a question mark on top of that's asking the equality question. The single equals is an assignment statement, which I often think of as moving the 42 into ands, and the double equals is the equality question. All of these logical operators are questions. So we have equality, not equal, less than or equal to, or less than equal, greater than equal, and or an exclamation. That's not. Exclamations like blah, 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 not. Okay. And curly braces are used to connect the beginning and mark the beginning and end of blocks of text. And so the if statement has a logical expression, if, and then parentheses, and then some kind of a logical expression that's asking the question. And in this case, if it's true, it runs this code, and if it's false, it runs that code. And so in this case, the answer is indeed 42. So the code runs like this, and then it's done, and so out comes hello world. Whitespace does not matter. I put whitespace in here just because I think whitespace is pretty and I want to be able to read my own code. But C was originally a very, very dense language on very small screens with very slow computers, and so characters were not something that they could. Extra spaces seem like a waste to those folks. And so this code down here is exactly the same code. And if you just look, it's the same code with all of the white space and the new lines just chopped out, right? It just, answer equals 42 semicolon, if answer blah, 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 bracket. New lines just don't matter. So I like that. I mean, that doesn't mean I don't put white space in. I don't make my code pretty. It all depends on what you prefer in terms of the indentation. It's a good way to start argument with programmers as to whether you like the sort of more dense. It's the Kernighan and Ritchie because it came from the original C textbook. Do I have the C textbook? Yes, I do have the C textbook. There's the original C textbook, C programming language from Brian Kernighan and Dennis Ritchie. And if we look at the beginning of this, we see I don't know if you can see it or not. Right there is print hello world. So that's the original C book. Of course, PHP is inspired by C. So that's the old Kernighan and Ritchie style. I like it because it's dense. I come from an older time where vertical space on a screen was a premium. Some people prefer this. The reality is, if you're working with a group of people, don't argue with them. Just do whatever it is that they do. Associative arrays. If you run into somebody that tells you that PHP is their favorite language, it's almost always the case that their favorite feature that makes PHP their favorite language is the associative array feature. It's much more powerful than a Python dictionary or a list. As a matter of fact, it's kind of a Python dictionary and list combined together. And as a computer scientist, you look at this and you go like, ooh, it's kind of creepy. What exactly is going on? But what happens is as a user, as a power user, you can create different kind of structures in arrays really without thinking very much. You can have keys if you want, like a Python dictionary, or you can have numbers like a list if you want. They can be, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 100, 200, 300. It just doesn't matter. And they can be sorted. They're just amazing because you can do anything you want. Now you have a responsibility to know what your data looks like, but they're really powerful and really very flexible. Probably the most flexible data structure in, JavaScript's also kind of flexible, but they're a very, very flexible data structure. So here's a real simple array. So the constructor of the array, the way you make one is there's an array function basically that you pass in various values. In this case, I'm passing in 2 strings to the array. And so I get back a 2-item array and get it put into the variable stuff. And the index operation is the square brackets, as is in C and really most modern languages use square brackets. And so this stuff sub 1 is there. And that's because the first item by default is 0 and the second item is 1. So stuff sub 1 is this guy right here. Okay? And so that's an integer index array. Now you can create an array dynamically. You can create an array by an empty array. That's an empty array because we didn't put any stuff in there. And we can use the bracket with no value in there and just that says append to the end. So this puts the sub 0 item in and the sub 1 item in. And so if we echo stuff sub 1, that is this 0 item, the 1 item, so world is what comes out. You don't have to make them dense if you don't want to. You just put in whatever you want. I mean, why are we doing this? I don't know why we're doing this, but PHP is totally happy with you doing it. So stuff sub 9, the fact that 0, 1, and 2 0 and 1 don't exist and 3 through 8 don't exist, PHP doesn't care. You told it what you wanted to happen, and it makes it happen. Much more flexible than most data structures. So you can create an array that's key value by basically, in this array syntax, you have, instead of just the values, you have a key that maps to. And I like to think of this as maps to. Map to. So name maps to Chuck. Course maps to SI664. So this is the key, and this is the value. And that gives you back an array. This is a 2-element array. There are 2 elements. There's not 4, there's 2. And Chuck and SI664 are the 2, but they can be looked up by key. And so now if we do the lookup, the index operator here with the square brackets, we look at stuff sub course. And stuff sub course goes in the array, finds the key course, and then pulls out the SI664 value. We have some quick and dirty debugging tools. These are mostly used for developers. We don't use this to, sometimes when I'm debugging PHP, I just say, like, what's in this variable? And one of them is called print_r. And it produces an output that looks like this, where it just takes the array and gives us the keys and the values. And if you can have arrays that contain arrays and relatively complex structures, and print_r will look through all that stuff. So you just pass in an array, and it will go through it and print it out for you. Print_r, again, if you just print out an array that has numbers in it, it just shows you the numbers and where they're at, and this really emphasizes to you that 0, 1, and 1 don't exist, and these guys don't exist. They're just not there. You can put them in any time, and it'll just dynamically make space for them. There's another way to dump this stuff out, and it's a little more verbose, but in some ways it's more helpful. So I kind of go back and forth as a developer when I'm playing using var dump. The var dump will tell you not only everything that's in there, but it also tells you the type of it. So it's kind of the same information in a little more verbose format. It says you are a 2-element array. The key of name maps to a string, a 5-character string with Chuck in it. So it's pretty much the same thing. It all depends on what you're trying to print out. Print_r is a little prettier, a little more succinct, and var dump is sometimes saves you. And so var dump, because it's telling you the type of things, it can show you things that print_r will ignore. One particular thing that's sort of weird is the handling of the variable false. Now, false here is a constant, true or false. So false is a constant, capital F-A-L-S-E, or lowercase false, doesn't matter. So now inside the variable thing here, we have false. And so I'm going to say echo 1, which prints out this line right here. Then I'm going to print thing, which is going to print nothing. So false has like infinitesimally small under print_r, and then print 2. So you can get in a lot of trouble by echo doesn't print it, nothing prints a false out. The only thing that actually prints a false out is var dump. And so this is where, if you're kind of lost and you're like, I can't print it out, var dump will at least tell you the type of the thing, because it's a Boolean with a value of false. And so var dump, if you're sort of like grasping at straws, is probably the better tool for you to deal with. PHP has a great way to loop through arrays. Here we have this little 2-element array that has the name and course. I can loop through this array. Let's switch to yellow. The for each command, for each is a PHP reserved word. Stuff, that is the array that we're going to iterate through. As is a PHP keyword. And K maps to V. That's how I read this. $K maps to $V. These are 2 iteration variables, K and V, and they are going to successively go through the key value pairs. K is going to go name course, V is going to go Chuck SI664. So this loop is going to run twice. This loop is going to run twice, 2 times. Once for this line, once for that line with K and V, assuming those values. So if I just print out name Chuck, course val, course SI664. This is, again, you can look at this and you're like, wow, that's succinct. And it's exactly what you want to say. I got an array, it's got some keys and values, go through them. Remember that this little operator, whether it's in this kind of array constant form or here, I think of that as maps to. That's what I always read in my mind when I see that equals greater than sign. This maps to that. I love that. I like that because it's got a direction to it. So strings, I mentioned strings earlier. They're very cool. They're very powerful. They're more powerful than most language strings, especially the double quote one. So you can use single quotes or double quotes, and the backslash in both cases is the escape character. And strings can span multiple lines, which is actually really cool when you're printing out a lot of stuff. And variables are expanded inside of double quoted strings. So this is a single quote string. And so you see I'm dropping into PHP. I have an open close quote. And this is an example where this is the open quote and the closed quote is all the way down here. And this is a real new line here. I mean, you don't have to type it, but those new lines actually come out when you print out. Okay. Now, another thing is when you're in the middle of a single quote string, the double quotes are just another character. Sometimes I just switch back and forth between single quotes and double quotes. I'll make my double quotes be the outer things if single quotes be the outer ones if I put double quotes inside. If you want a single quote inside of a single quoted string, you do backslash single quote. And a lot of the normal expansions don't happen inside a single quote. So this will actually print out \n as compared to a new line that takes you back to the beginning of the screen. And things like variables do not expand either. That will actually just print out $expand. We'll see in the next how that works a little differently for double quotes. So in this double quote example, double quotes, these are more powerful. I think of the single quotes as really simple. Pretty much the only thing you do in single quotes is put \, single quote in there. Okay? So, but for double quotes, we got all kinds of things in there. The first thing that's really, really common is \n, which does not work inside single quotes. That is, the new line character that takes your output back to the beginning of the line. Like single quotes, you can have embedded do lines. You don't have to put them in. The fact that you have line breaks means that it knows that you want to print this out, followed by this next thing, followed by this next thing. Now, there's no new line here, but you've got these two new lines. And again, that's really nice. You just kind of start a quote, start a string, and you just go cha-cha-cha-cha-cha right on down. And so this new line actually happens, and so you'll output 2 lines. The new line becomes the cursor movement that comes over there. And this seems really weird when you first look at it. And then the next thing you know, you're just like rocking it, and you're using it all the time, and you're like, that's like so scary, I won't even use it. So here's the variable expand. I've set it to 12. And inside of a double quoted string, $expand will be replaced by 12. Really, it's pretty cool. So double quotes are like smart strings. Single quotes are like dumb strings. So that's single quotes and double quotes. Oops. Bing, bing, ding. So that's sort of a roar through it. That's just kind of a teaser to the kind of stuff that we're going to talk about in upcoming chapters. Thanks.